This last couple of years, there's a word that we haven't heard or seen much of at all, especially in the media. And it's this little word, joy. Joy seems a word that many people would say is misplaced or even outdated, particularly in our current world. But the Bible presents a really strange idea. The Bible presents the idea that joy, this inner contentment, inner peace, is something we can actually choose. Yes, it's a gift given to us, but more often than not, it's something we're told to do, something we're told to choose day by day. And I put it to you, if joy is something that we're commanded to do, it must be possible to choose to do it, right? God wouldn't command us to do something that's not possible. Here's some examples. First of all, Psalm 47. Clap your hands, all you nations. Shout to God with cries of joy. Doesn't say if you feel like it, just says do it. Or Philippians 4. Rejoice in the Lord. I'll say it again, rejoice, says Paul. Or James, where he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials. That's a really tough one. But if God is telling us to do something, it must be possible to choose to do it. Seems in the Bible, God's people are not only given the gift of joy, but more often are commanded to be joyful in circumstances that don't feel joyful. But here's the problem, right? We don't feel joyful often. I don't feel joyful most often. For some people, the command, be joyful, rejoice, is an invitation and people are drawn up into it, into joy. But for many of us, we're not. We actually don't feel joyful. We find it very hard to be joyful. Both responses are normal. Well, here's a psalm, a very honest psalm of David that I think might help us. David's life, as you probably know, was very mixed, full of great accomplishments, mixed in with deep regret and appalling tragedy. At least 2 of his sons will die violently. Well, as we pick up this psalm, David has had a grave illness. An illness he's almost died from. He's been afraid, he's been uncertain, he's been worried, he's been close to death. And in that very honest situation, he writes a very honest psalm. He's also surrounded by enemies on the borders of Israel. And so with these contrasting thoughts, let me read this psalm, Psalm 30. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you restored my health. You brought me up from the grave, O Lord. You kept me falling into the pit of death. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favour lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. When I was prosperous, I said, nothing can stop me now. Your favour, O Lord, made me as secure as a mountain. Then you turned away from me and I was shattered. I cried out to you, O Lord. I begged to the Lord for mercy, saying, what will you gain if I die, if I sink into the grave? Can my dust praise you? Can it tell of your faithfulness? Hear me, O Lord, and have mercy on me. Help me, O Lord. You've turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You've taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy, that I might sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever. Let's draw attention to a few of these verses and see if we can relate them to this idea of joy. First of all, though, verse 1, which is a common idea, a common word that we see in Psalms, and it's this idea of enemies. Verse 1 says, I will exalt you, O Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. And in the Psalms, we often hear the word enemies. Now, for David, they were physical enemies, the Philistines most often. But as far as we're concerned, I don't have physical enemies. I don't have people waiting to do me in, to beat me up, to kill me. When I read about enemies in the Psalms, I most often think of my own thoughts, of my negative thoughts, of my anxious thoughts, of my worried thoughts. They are most often my enemies. They're the things that pull me down, that drag me down, particularly in these uncertain times. And I think that idea is carried in the Psalms as well. Think about, for example, Psalm 7, where it says, my enemies rise up on me and surround me. Sometimes my negative thoughts do rise up on me and surround me. Or Psalm 42, my enemies say, where is your God? Sometimes my enemies do say, my thoughts do say, Chris, where is your God? Think about that idea the next time you see the word enemies in Psalms. It's not just physical enemies, But then let's go to verse 3. It talks about tough times. You've brought me up from the grave, O Lord. You kept me falling into the pit of death. Who hasn't felt like they were falling into a pit this last couple of years? These last 2 COVID-filled years? Who hasn't felt that on at least some level? Or indeed verse 6 and 7, where David confesses he's been proud and self-confident in the past. When I was prosperous, I said, nothing can stop me now. Haven't many of us done that in the past? I know I have. I've been full of self-confidence that when things were prospering, I was in complete control, only to have the rug pulled out. And again, who hasn't felt the rug pulled out from underneath them this last couple of years? And here's that exact idea in verse 7. Your favour, O Lord, made me as secure as a mountain. But then you turned away from me and I was shattered. Who hasn't felt, at least at some point, shattered in these last months? Particularly when we think things are getting better. We're just coming out of a lockdown, and then suddenly these wretched curves, these exponentials of cases and deaths start soaring off again. Who hasn't felt the rug pulled out from under them? Who hasn't felt shattered? But mixed in with these thoughts, David makes a conscious choice. And we'll see it first in verse 5, where he says, weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. There are still troubles in his life, not least his long road to redemption and the continuing noise of enemies inside and outside Israel. But what a tremendous encouragement. Verse 6, we see his choice. Inner contentment and peace will always come, he says. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. Or all will be well in the end. And if it isn't well, it isn't the end. He makes this choice again in verse 11 to 12 at the end of the psalm. You've turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You've taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy, that I might sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever. You see, for David, there are 2 narratives going on, 2 stories in his life, and both are true. He'd been close to death. Even now he has many enemies inside and outside Israel who without a moment's thought would put a knife to his throat. But his choice, he says, no, I will focus on this. You've turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You've taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy. We also have a similar choice. We always have 2 narratives, 2 stories going on in our lives. You can tell yourself the story. I haven't been able to go on holiday this year. I've missed people. I've been locked in. Why are other people having a better life than me? Guess what? It's raining again. And often those things are true. We can choose to focus on them. We can choose to see our life through pain, weariness, and uncertainty. Or we can choose to see our lives through the eyes of a God who allows no experience to be wasted. God doesn't bring bad times on us, but God uses those bad times to form us, to create courage, valor, perseverance, empathy, appreciation. Without bad times, we wouldn't grow in character, we wouldn't grow in faith. You see, joy can be a gift, like a great holiday you weren't expecting, or a box of chocolates that somebody gives you as a surprise. It can be. But the joy we find in Scripture most often is a choice, and one that we must make in our everyday. So, you could focus on that first story on complaints about why your life isn't as good as everybody else's, or you could choose to focus on the second, equally true story. You could choose to tell yourself the true story that after many months of COVID, I have a new appreciation for the world around me. I have a new appreciation for nature, for walks I've discovered that I wouldn't have otherwise, for new hobbies perhaps that I've picked up. You can tell yourself the story that there are lots of things in my life that are not broken. There are lots of illnesses that I don't have. There are actually parts of my life that are working really well, and I'm going to have gratitude and say thanks. Thankfulness is a key to joy. You can tell yourself the story that God has a purpose for my life, and that even in bad times, he teaches me new empathy, new patience, new resilience, new courage, new ways of waiting on him. You can tell yourself the story that I know an unchanging God in a world of continual change. You can tell yourself the story, the true story, that weeping may last through the night, but joy will come in the morning. Day by day, and sometimes moment by moment, joy is the story we choose to tell ourselves.